It was Christmas Eve, and snow had begun to fall in gentle waves over the quiet streets of Redmond, Washington. The neighborhood, a collection of clean-lined homes and glowing porches, looked like something out of a holiday catalog. Inside one of those pristine houses, the Carter family was seated around a long walnut dining table adorned with flickering candles, silver cutlery, and perfectly plated roast beef. The atmosphere was stiff but presentable. Emily Harder, 25. Isata Sai sat near the edge of the table, dressed in a simple navy blue dress, her posture straight, her eyes scanning the room. Across from her sat her father, Peter, wineglass in hand. Beside him, Monica, his second wife, wore a burgundy satin dress and a smile as artificial as the porcelain plates in front of them. Liam, her half-brother, 19, and arrogant in a way only the pampered could be, scrolled lazily on his phone under the table, oblivious to the holiday setting. Emily had arrived half an hour earlier, carrying a modest bottle of red wine and a hand-wrapped gift for her stepmother. No one had really noticed. No one had thanked her. She had prepared herself for another quiet, detached evening. She would sit politely, smile when necessary, eat carefully, then leave as soon as it was acceptable. That had been the plan. Until he walked in. The front door opened without warning. Everyone turned. Franklin Carter, tall even in his old age, stood at the threshold, brushing snow from his charcoal coat. His silver hair was neatly combed, his boots polished his presence commanding. He had not visited in years. He lived in New York and rarely left the city, too caught up in the quiet business of retirement and the occasional philanthropic event. And yet here he was at Emily's childhood home, or rather what had once been a home before she had learned how replaceable she was. Grandpa Emily rose instinctively. He smiled at her warmly as if only she existed. Then he looked around the room and let out a hearty laugh. "I thought I'd surprise the family," he said, stepping in. "After all, it's Christmas Eve." Peter stood awkwardly, walking over to shake his hand. Monica followed with a stiff, practiced grin. Liam didn't bother to get up. They made small talk. Or rather, Peter tried to, and Franklin nodded along, his sharp eyes glancing around the house, observing the tasteful decor, the fresh paint, the expensive lighting fixtures. As the meal began, Franklin took the seat at the head of the table. He poured himself a glass of wine, lifted it slightly, and looked at Emily. "So," he said with a gentle smile. "Emily, do you like the house?" She blinked. Her fork paused mid-air. "I beg your pardon?" she asked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Franklin's smile grew wider, proud even. "This house. The one I bought for you 2 years ago. Do you like it?" The entire room froze. Emily's heart stopped. A silence fell so heavy it seemed to pull the air from the room. I don't live here," she said slowly. "I rent an apartment in Tacoma. A small one. I visit here sometimes, but I don't live in this house." Franklin's smile faltered. "What?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. Peter's fingers tightened around his wineglass. Monica's fork clinked against her plate. Liam, for once, looked up from his phone. Franklin's eyes narrowed, scanning the faces around him before returning to Emily. "You don't live here," he repeated. "No," Emily said again, more firmly now, though her voice shook. "I never have." Franklin sat back in his chair slowly. He looked at Peter, then Monica. His eyes grew sharper, colder. "I gave you $450,000, he said, his voice steady but low. "I told you to buy a home for Emily. Her name was supposed to be on the deed." Peter said nothing. Monica opened her mouth, then closed it. Franklin turned back to Emily. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I believed." He didn't finish the sentence. Neither did anyone else. Outside, the snow fell heavier. Inside, something had just shattered. Not glass, not silverware, but something far more delicate. Trust. Emily stared at her father. Her hands trembled, but she kept them hidden under the table. Her grandfather slowly stood. "Peter," he said, "we need to talk. Now." And in that moment, Emily realized this was no ordinary dinner. This was the beginning of the reckoning. My name is Emily Carter, and for most of my life, I have learned how to disappear quietly. I was born in Everett, Washington, in the middle of a rainy April night. My mother, Laura, died hours after giving birth to me from complications no one ever clearly explained. I grew up with a father who wore grief like armor and silence like a second skin. When I was 4, he remarried Monica, a woman who wore perfume so strong it filled entire rooms before she even entered, and whose smile was always just tight enough to make me feel like a guest rather than family. From the moment she moved in, the air in our house changed. It no longer smelled like cinnamon or clean laundry. It smelled like control. When Monica had Liam 2 years later, everything shifted again, only this time it became permanent. Liam was the center of everything. Every meal, every holiday, every family photo revolved around him. I was there, but I was never really seen. I remember once when I was 6, I drew a picture of my mother and showed it to my father. He glanced at it, nodded, and returned to his newspaper. I never showed him another drawing. In school, I worked hard. I got good grades, joined the art club, won small design contests. None of it mattered. When Liam brought home a C in math, Monica baked a cake. When I was accepted into a youth interior design mentorship at a local firm, my father told me, "That's fine, but let's focus on something practical." At 14, I learned how to cut hair from YouTube videos so I could trim my own. Monica said I was wasting money at salons. At 15, I started helping a friend clean Airbnb units on weekends for cash. Liam was given an iPad. I was given chores. Our bedrooms told the full story. Liam's was downstairs, freshly painted in navy and white, filled with posters of tech entrepreneurs and a large desk with a built-in charger. Mine was in the attic with slanted ceilings, yellowed wallpaper, and a second-hand twin bed that squeaked every time I turned over. When I turned 18, I asked my father if he could help me apply for college loans or maybe co-sign an apartment lease so I could move closer to the design school in Seattle. He stared at me for a long moment and said, "Emily, you know Liam is preparing for college too. We need to prioritize." That word stuck with me. Prioritize. It didn't mean what it should have meant. It meant Liam came first. Always. I packed my things that week and moved into a shared unit with 2 other girls in Tacoma. It was small and the building was falling apart, but it was mine. I paid for it by waiting tables at a downtown cafe and taking freelance design gigs online. I taught myself software like AutoCAD and SketchUp on a refurbished laptop I had bought with tip money. It was exhausting, but every dollar I earned felt like a tiny rebellion. I never asked for help. I never looked back. Every month or so, my grandfather Franklin would call. He had retired years ago from his firm in Manhattan, but still followed every trend in architecture. He asked questions about my projects, listened to my frustrations, and once sent me a book called The Heart of Design. I still have it. He never asked why I didn't live with my family. Maybe he already knew. He often told me, "Your mother was brilliant but gentle. You have her spirit. You don't need to shout to prove your strength." That stayed with me. In the years that followed, I built my small reputation in online design communities. I created room mock-ups for clients, redesigned a few cafes, and helped startups shape their visual spaces. I didn't have much, but I was surviving. Quietly. Steadily. And then, this year, out of nowhere, I received a text from Monica. "Come for Christmas dinner. Liam wants to see you. 6 p.m. Don't be late." I didn't expect warmth, but something in me still wanted to believe maybe they had changed. Maybe they saw me now. I wrapped a simple scarf in blue silk for Monica, picked a bottle of Chilean wine I could barely afford, and drove through the snow to a house I didn't recognize. When I stepped inside and saw the marble floors, the gas fireplace, and the sprawling staircase, I realized they had moved and never told me. I smiled anyway, the way I had been trained. And then Grandpa walked in. Growing up in that house was like living on the edge of a stage, close enough to hear the lines, but never invited to speak them. I became skilled at observing, listening, folding my emotions into neat little packages, and tucking them away in the corners of my attic room. When people visited, Monica would introduce me as Peter's daughter, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, as if she needed to remind herself of my place. Liam was introduced with pride, a future innovator, the bright light of the family. At school events, my father rarely came. When he did, he stayed for the first 10 minutes and left after shaking hands with a few people. He never saw me win first place in the district design challenge. Monica never hung up the certificate. Instead, she replaced a hallway painting with a photo of Liam standing next to a robotics trophy he didn't even win. He just attended the event. I remember once in 9th grade, I was invited to a summer architecture camp in California. I brought the form home hopeful. Monica barely looked at it. It's too far. It's too expensive. Besides, you'll just end up drawing rooms for other people. Is that a career? My father didn't even open the envelope. I didn't go. Instead, I stayed home and cleaned out the garage while Liam went to coding camp. He returned with a t-shirt and a certificate of participation. They framed it. I stopped asking for things after that. There's something that happens when you're constantly made to feel like an inconvenience. You learn how to shrink, how to speak less, ask for less, expect less. I didn't want pity. I just wanted to be acknowledged. But even that became too much to hope for. On birthdays, Monica would bake Liam's favorite cake and invite neighbors over. For mine, she once forgot until I reminded her. That evening, she lit a candle on a leftover cupcake from the fridge. Liam laughed and asked if I was turning 12 or 60. I said nothing. I was 17. After high school, I worked as a part-time assistant at a print shop downtown while taking online courses in design. My father told relatives I was figuring things out while boasting that Liam had been accepted into a prestigious STEM academy. They posted pictures of his dorm room. I wasn't in any of them. On Thanksgiving, I would still go home. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't want to give them one more reason to say I had become distant. I would sit through dinners where Liam talked about his new drone, or Monica gushed about her book club. When I tried to share about a cafe, I helped redesign. Monica nodded vaguely and changed the topic. One year, I brought a client portfolio to show my father. He flipped through the pages and said, "These are nice. Do you think people pay much for this kind of thing?" That was the closest I ever got to praise. Liam got a car on his 18th birthday. I took the bus to work and sometimes walked home in the rain. They told me it built character. When I asked for help with rent during a slow work month, Monica replied, "You're an adult now, Emily. We've done our part." I stopped asking. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, and sold a watch my grandfather had once given me. He never knew. I didn't want him to worry. He thought I was building something, and I wanted him to believe that was true. I think what hurt the most wasn't the lack of financial support. It was the erasure, the photos without me, the holidays where my name wasn't on any gift tag, the casual way they referred to the house as ours even though I was rarely invited. I was a shadow in my own family. Present, but never truly seen. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was stronger because of it, that one day I'd build a life that needed no validation from them. But no matter how many walls I painted or rooms I redesigned for strangers, I couldn't fill the emptiness of never being enough for the people who should have loved me first. I didn't hate them. Not then. I just quietly detached the way people do when they know nothing will ever change. I created distance without drama. I answered texts politely. I sent holiday cards even when I received none in return. And slowly I disappeared from their lives in the same quiet way I had lived in their home. I thought I had moved on, until the night my grandfather asked me about the house. When I left home at 18, I didn't leave in anger. There was no shouting match, no slammed doors. I simply packed my clothes into a single suitcase, took the bus to Tacoma, and moved into a tiny studio that smelled like old carpet and damp cement. The rent was cheap because the ceiling leaked every winter and the windows refused to close fully, but it was mine. For the first time, I had 4 walls that were not borrowed. I worked as a waitress at a cafe near the University District. The tips were inconsistent, the customers rude, but it paid the bills. In the evenings, I studied. I didn't go to a formal college because no one helped me apply, and I couldn't afford the fees, but I enrolled in online design certification programs, watched countless tutorials, and read forums deep into the night. I taught myself software programs, memorized color theory, studied lighting, and learned how furniture placement could change how people felt inside a space. My laptop bought secondhand from a pawn shop overheated constantly, and the screen flickered every few hours. I kept a fan under it and worked anyway. I made my first portfolio on that laptop. I didn't have a mentor or professional references. I had screenshots of mood boards, mock-ups of imaginary hotel lobbies, and before and after photos of my own apartment after I repainted the walls and rearranged the layout to make it feel bigger than it was. It was humble, but it was honest. My first client was a woman who owned a vintage bookstore. She found me through a design subreddit and asked if I could help her redesign the store to attract younger readers. I charged her $100 for the full project. It took me 2 weeks working between shifts and in the early mornings. She was thrilled with the result and referred me to a friend. That friend referred another. Slowly, I built something. Small, fragile, but real. I started getting freelance jobs more regularly, sometimes just room layout consultations, sometimes full space planning for small offices or home studios. I never earned much, but each project added a new line to my resume. I still worked at the cafe. I still skipped meals when tips were slow. I still boiled water in a pot when the electric kettle broke. But I never felt sorry for myself. I didn't want pity. I wanted progress. I wanted to become someone my grandfather could be proud of, even if he never saw the details. He called once every few weeks. Those conversations were like a lifeline. He asked about my projects and told me stories about his own early days in architecture. He never pried into my family situation. He never asked why I wasn't living at home or if my father helped me. Instead, he spoke to me like I was capable, like he believed I would make it. He sent me books sometimes, always with a handwritten note. Once he wrote, "Emily, never let someone else decide your worth. You define it project by project, brick by brick." I taped that note to my wall. On rainy nights when the roof leaked and my blanket was too thin, I would read it aloud like a prayer. The world didn't give me much, but it gave me a chance to work, and I clung to that. Monica and Peter rarely contacted me. Liam never did. On holidays, I sent cards. On birthdays, I sent short messages. Rarely did they reply. I didn't mind. I had stopped needing their approval long ago. I started saving. Not much, but enough to dream. I wanted to someday open a small design studio, maybe a shared space with other freelancers, a place where people like me could feel welcome. I didn't want luxury. I wanted security. I wanted to never again feel like I was borrowing space in someone else's life. I lived quietly. I didn't post much on social media. I didn't attend many events. I focused on clients, on learning, on becoming better. There were days I cried from exhaustion, nights I fell asleep on the keyboard. But through it all, I never considered quitting, because quitting would mean they were right, that I couldn't make it, that I didn't deserve more. And I did. I knew I did. I just had to earn it in a way no one could take from me. So when Monica messaged me in early December and said, "Come for Christmas dinner, Liam wants to see you," I hesitated. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd last seen them. I didn't trust the message, but I still replied, "Sure, I'll be there." Because part of me, the part that still remembered birthdays without candles and holidays spent in silence, wanted to believe that maybe things had changed, that maybe they had seen what I built, that maybe they finally saw me. I spent the last of my grocery money on a modest bottle of red wine and a silk scarf I thought Monica would like. I wore my only clean dress. I did my hair. I drove to the address Monica had sent and parked in front of a large cream-colored house with arched windows and a manicured lawn. I had never been there before. No one had told me they moved, and yet somehow it still felt familiar. The house stood proud and polished under the soft glow of Christmas lights. The lawn had those inflatable reindeer that Liam always found amusing, and the porch railing was wrapped in garlands with carefully arranged pine cones. It didn't look like a house people had just moved into. It looked lived in, settled, designed with purpose. I walked up the stone steps, bottle in one hand and the gift bag in the other, trying to ignore the feeling that I was about to walk into a place where I didn't belong. Monica opened the door before I knocked. She looked surprised, or maybe just unprepared to fake warmth. Her eyes scanned my coat, my hair, my hands. "Emily, you made it," she said, stepping aside. Her voice was too sweet, her smile too rehearsed. I stepped inside and was immediately wrapped in the scent of roasted meat and fresh baked bread. The interior of the house was perfect. Wood floors, exposed beams, a fireplace with custom stonework, sleek furniture in soft beige tones, a dining table large enough for 10. There were family photos on the wall. Peter and Monica arms around each other, Liam holding a drone in one, posing with classmates in another. There were no photos of me. Not a single one. Peter stood in the kitchen uncorking wine with the same expression he wore when reading the news. When he saw me, he gave a nod, just one, as if I were a coworker arriving late to a meeting. "You're here," he said. I handed him the wine. "Merry Christmas, Dad." He took it, set it on the counter without looking at the label, and returned to his task. Liam appeared from down the hallway wearing a fitted sweater and holding a can of soda. "Emily," he said, as if surprised. "Wow, look at you." "Long time, huh?" I nodded. "Yeah, it's been a while." The table was set with precision. Candles, cloth napkins, name cards. Monica had even arranged tiny sprigs of holly at each setting. I found mine at the very end of the table next to an empty chair. "We're waiting for one more," she said vaguely when I asked. "Just a little surprise." I tried not to overthink it. Dinner began with idle chatter. Liam talked about his college dorm, some startup idea he was developing. Monica chimed in with updates from her neighborhood book club. Peter mostly stayed quiet, sipping wine. I listened, offered polite nods, and forced a few smiles. No one asked about my work. No one asked where I lived or how I was doing. I wasn't surprised. I had learned long ago not to expect curiosity from people who only saw you as an obligation. Then, just as Monica brought out the main course, the doorbell rang. Everyone paused. "Can you get that, Liam?" Peter asked. Liam shrugged and walked off. A moment later, I heard the door open, followed by a voice I hadn't heard in person in years. "Ho, ho, ho! I hope I'm not too late for dinner. It was my grandfather." Franklin Carter stepped into the room like he owned it, tall, confident, dressed in a dark coat dusted with snow. His presence filled the space instantly. Monica blinked rapidly, caught completely off guard. Peter's face went pale. Liam looked stunned. I stood up. "Grandpa," I said. He smiled and opened his arms. "Emily, my dear girl." I ran into his hug, startled but happy. His embrace was warm and strong, the only one in that room that felt real. "I thought I'd join you all for Christmas," he said, walking toward the table. "Surprise." Monica scrambled to add a chair. Peter poured him a drink with shaking hands. Franklin took his place at the head of the table as if it had always been his. "What a beautiful house," he said, eyes scanning the room. "Just as I imagined it when I sent the money." Peter coughed. Monica laughed nervously. "We're so glad you could come," she said. "This really is the family's home now." Franklin nodded slowly, then turned to me with that familiar warmth. "So, Emily," he said, picking up his fork, "do you like the house?" I blinked. "What?" "This house. The one I bought for you 2 years ago. Do you like it?" The room fell silent. Everything stopped. Monica's hand froze midair. Peter lowered his glass. Liam stared straight ahead. I felt my stomach twist. "Grandpa," I said carefully, "I don't live here." His brows furrowed. "What do you mean I rent an apartment in Tacoma? I visit sometimes, but this isn't my house." Franklin set his fork down. His gaze sharpened. "Peter," he said slowly, "what's going on?" And that was the moment I realized this dinner wasn't just a holiday meal. It was the beginning of an unraveling none of them had seen coming. Franklin leaned back in his chair, the quiet scrape of wood against tile sounding louder than the Christmas music playing faintly in the background. His eyes remained locked on Peter, calm but piercing like a judge waiting for a confession. Peter adjusted his collar, cleared his throat, then reached for his wine glass again, as if the stem might anchor him. "Dad," he began, his voice thin, "there's been a misunderstanding." Franklin didn't blink. "I sent you $450,000. I instructed you to purchase a home for Emily. I said it clearly in my email, in the transfer note, and again on the call we had afterward. This house was meant to belong to her." Monica tried to step in. "Franklin, you don't understand. At the time, Emily wasn't really in a stable place. She was working odd jobs, barely keeping up with rent. We thought she'd be overwhelmed by the responsibility of owning a home." Franklin turned to her, his voice still even. "So instead of helping her, you took the house." She smiled nervously. "It wasn't like that. We needed a place too, and Liam was about to start college. It made sense for the whole family." "Family," Franklin repeated as if tasting the word and finding it bitter. He looked at Peter again. "You put the deed in your name, didn't you?" Peter's eyes dropped. Yes, but I always intended to share it later. We just needed time." I sat frozen, the words bouncing inside my skull like stones in a jar. The house. This house. The house I had walked into as a guest, the house with no photos of me, no memories of me, had been mine all along. My chest tightened. I felt like the air had been yanked from the room. I struggled for years, I said softly. I lived in a leaking apartment. I worked 2 jobs. I never once asked for help. And all this time you had a house waiting for me. Monica's tone shifted sharper now. Don't act like you were owed anything, Emily. You left. You made your own choices. Franklin stood. The room seemed to shrink under his height. She left because you gave her no place to stay. You took what was hers. You lied to me. You sent staged photos, made it look like she was living here. I trusted you with her future. Peter stepped forward, his voice cracking. Dad, we didn't think you'd ever follow up. You were busy in New York. We figured we'd tell you eventually. We just needed to keep things going until Liam was settled. Liam, Franklin said, turning his gaze to the boy, who now looked distinctly uncomfortable. What do you know about this? Liam looked up, his bravado gone. I didn't know the house was supposed to be Emily's. They never told me. I thought Grandpa gave it to the family. Franklin shook his head. Emily is the only grandchild of my daughter Laura. I wanted to honor her memory by giving her a home, a foundation. And you turned it into a lie. Monica raised her voice. Emily didn't even have a career. What was she going to do with a house? She would have ruined it. At least we took care of it. My hands trembled. You erased me. You used my name to secure money and then cut me out of everything. I worked every day to survive while you lived in comfort, and you thought I wouldn't find out. Peter sat down, heavily defeated. We didn't plan to hurt you. We just thought you'd be fine on your own. And that's the problem, I said, my voice steady now. You never thought I mattered enough to deserve what was mine. Franklin pulled out his phone. I'm calling my attorney. First thing tomorrow, we're transferring ownership of this house to Emily. It should have been hers from the beginning. Monica looked outraged. You can't do that. We've lived here for 2 years. We've made it our home. You built your home on a lie, Franklin replied. You took from your own daughter and used my money to do it. There will be consequences. Peter covered his face with his hands. Dad, please, don't. I trusted you, and you treated my generosity like a loophole to exploit. He turned to me. Pack your things tonight. You're not staying here. You're coming to New York with me. We'll handle the legal side. I'll make sure everything is corrected. I didn't move. I looked around the room at the fine furniture, the warm lights, the pictures of a family I had never truly belonged to. It had all been a show. Okay, I said quietly. Let's go. And with that, the illusion shattered. The Christmas decorations, the laughter from earlier, the idea of family. It all fell away. What was left was truth, uncomfortable, heavy, but necessary. We walked out of the house that night in silence. Snowflakes drifted through the air, catching the light from the porch lanterns, softening the harsh lines of the moment. I carried nothing but my coat and my purse. The bottle of wine I had brought still sat unopened on the kitchen counter. The silk scarf remained unwrapped beneath the tree. Franklin opened the passenger door of his rental car and waited as I climbed in. He didn't speak until we had driven 2 blocks away, the glow of the house fading behind us. Emily, he said, keeping his eyes on the road. I am so sorry. I looked out the window. It's not your fault. Yes, it is, he replied. I trusted Peter. I thought he'd at least protect what was meant for you. I didn't think I needed to monitor every step. They sent you photos, didn't they? I asked. Of me. In the house. He nodded slowly. Every holiday. Family photos with you on the edge. You were always just barely in the frame. I almost laughed, because I was never in the picture to begin with. Franklin gripped the steering wheel. They used you. They used your name, your image, your silence. But they're not going to get away with it. I spoke to my attorney tonight. We'll transfer ownership. The house will be in your name within days. What about them? I asked. Peter, Monica, they'll have to move out. I'm cutting off all support, and if they contest anything, we'll go to court. I have every email, every transfer receipt. The law is on your side. I turned to him, feeling anger bubble just beneath my exhaustion. I don't want revenge. I want clarity. I want them to understand what they did. That's exactly what they fear, he said. They fear your voice because it makes the lie visible. We arrived at a hotel just off the main road. It was quiet, modest, but warm. The front desk clerk gave us a key, and Franklin insisted I take the larger room. I didn't argue. That night, I sat on the edge of a king-size bed staring at the ceiling. The air smelled like pine and clean sheets. For the first time in years, I felt like I had space to breathe. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Monica. Just a single line. "I hope you're happy." I stared at it, fingers hovering over the screen. I didn't reply. The next morning, Franklin called a family lawyer. By noon, the paperwork had been started. By evening, the legal transfer of property was underway. Monica sent more messages, first angry, then pleading. Peter left a voicemail saying he was sorry and that he had never wanted it to turn out this way. I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say to them. Franklin booked us flights to New York. He told me there was a guest room ready in his townhouse and an internship waiting at a design firm he had once mentored. I didn't know how to thank him. "Just build something beautiful," he said. "That's all I ask." As the plane took off, I looked down at the snowy rooftops, the rows of lights strung along neighborhood streets. Somewhere down there, Monica and Peter were packing boxes. Liam was probably blaming everyone but himself. And for the first time, I didn't care. In New York, the days moved fast. Franklin introduced me to people who saw my work and didn't ask who my parents were. I began working on real projects, real spaces, the kind I used to dream about while scrubbing cafe tables and heating soup over a hot plate. I kept my head down and worked, but I also started to write. I wrote about what it meant to be erased by your own family, about building from nothing, about choosing dignity over vengeance. Franklin read every word. "You should publish these," he said. "Not to expose them, but to remind others that they're not alone." I smiled. Maybe someday. A few weeks later, the title deed arrived in my name. The house was mine, and yet I didn't return to it. I had no desire to live in a space built on deceit. I called a real estate agent and listed it for sale. The proceeds would fund the rest of my education, and maybe, one day, the studio I had dreamed of. Franklin watched me sign the paperwork. "You're stronger than I ever imagined," he said. "Your mother would be proud." I believed him. I finally believed I deserved that kind of pride. Not because I had survived, but because I had chosen to live on my own terms. Fully, honestly, completely. My life in New York started quietly. I didn't announce it to anyone back in Washington. I didn't post updates or send out emails. I simply moved forward. I shared Franklin's home, a beautiful townhouse in the Upper West Side with high ceilings, art on the walls, and a small sunroom filled with books. My room overlooked a quiet street lined with bare trees and old brick buildings. In the mornings, I made coffee and walked with Franklin to the subway, where he insisted on taking the train, just like everyone else. I began my internship at a boutique design studio that specialized in revitalizing old spaces. My job was simple at first, organizing samples, assisting with site visits, learning to listen. But slowly, I found my rhythm. I was given small projects to lead, then larger ones. I designed a reading nook for a library in Queens, a minimalist reception area for a tech startup in Brooklyn. Each task, no matter how small, felt like a step toward becoming the person I had always envisioned. I worked long hours, but I wasn't tired the same way I used to be. This work fed something inside me. For the first time, I was building not just for survival, but for expression. Franklin and I would meet for dinner twice a week, sometimes at a small Italian place he liked, sometimes at home over soup and bread. He would ask about my progress, always listening, always encouraging. "You see the space," he told me once, "but more importantly, you see the people in it. That's rare." I started journaling again, not out of sadness, but out of a desire to understand how far I had come. I wrote about color theory and light balance, about forgiveness and boundaries. I wrote about silence not as absence, but as a space we can choose to fill on our own terms. I didn't think about Peter and Monica much. Occasionally, I received updates through distant acquaintances. They had downsized to a rental apartment in a quiet suburb. Liam had dropped out of school, unsure of what to do next. The messages stopped coming when it became clear I wouldn't respond. And I didn't. Not out of cruelty, but because I no longer needed anything from them. Not apology, not explanation, not closure. They had become like old furniture left behind in a house I no longer lived in. When the house in Washington sold, I used the proceeds to pay off my student loans and invest in a small co-working space for design freelancers in Brooklyn. I called it Second Form. It was modest with shared desks, good lighting, and a wall of pinned-up sketches from every member. People came in with laptops, paper, and dreams, just like I had. I taught workshops on spatial layout, color, emotion, and how to pitch to clients. I never mentioned my past unless someone asked, and even then I told it like a story I had once read in a book, distant, meaningful, but no longer mine. One afternoon, while organizing fabric swatches, I found a folded note in my old sketchbook. It was from Franklin, written months earlier. In design, we honor the story of a space. In life, we must do the same. You are the story. Own it. I cried when I read it quietly in the middle of an empty studio. Not because I was sad, but because for once, the tears felt like release, not pain. Franklin passed away a year later peacefully in his sleep. He left behind a legacy of integrity and intention and a letter addressed to me. In it, he wrote, "You are my greatest project, not because I built you, but because I stood back and watched you build yourself." I spoke at his memorial, not as the granddaughter of a successful architect, but as someone who had been seen, truly seen, and changed by it. That was the gift he gave me. Years passed. Second Form grew. I hired 2 assistants. I mentored a student who reminded me of myself, quiet, careful, and determined. I published a book about design and healing. I was invited to speak at conferences, but none of it compared to the quiet joy of unlocking the studio each morning knowing it was mine. Knowing I had built it with hands that had once been dismissed. I fell in love with someone who saw my silences as spaces, not voids. We decorated our apartment together. It was nothing grand, but it was full of warmth and intentional design. Every object had a purpose. Every corner had light. One night, while standing on the balcony watching snow fall over the city, he asked me, "Do you ever miss the house in Washington?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said, "because it was never really mine." And then I smiled. "But this is. If you've made it this far into my story, perhaps it's because something about it feels familiar. Maybe you too have been forgotten in a room full of people who should have seen you. Maybe you've given more than you received, stayed longer than you should, or kept quiet to keep the peace. If so, let me say this clearly: you are not invisible. You are not small. You were never meant to live on the margins of your own life. It took me years to understand that love in its purest form does not erase. It does not ask you to shrink, to silence your voice, to accept crumbs when you deserve the table. I spent my youth believing that family meant endurance, that blood outweighed boundaries. But I've learned something else. Family is not defined by shared names or inherited traits. It is defined by presence, by consistency, by the people who show up when it's hardest. My grandfather showed up, not because he was perfect, but because he chose to. He stood by me not with noise or grand speeches, but with action, with belief. And that changed everything. If you are watching this and you've been cast aside, if your worth has been questioned or ignored, let me remind you that the story isn't over. You can still rewrite the ending. You can walk away from what breaks you and build something that holds. It won't be easy. You may have to start from nothing. You may cry over kitchen sinks, skip meals, miss holidays. But in the quiet of that struggle, you will begin to hear your own voice again. You will remember that dignity is not granted by others. It is claimed by you. And once you have it, no one can take it away. I don't look back with hatred. I don't wish them harm. But I no longer carry their silence as my burden. I have learned to give space to grief, to let it pass through like weather. It still rains sometimes, but I have an umbrella now. One I built myself. To the parents who are watching, please remember that your children see more than you think. They feel your indifference, your dismissals, your favoritism, and those small wounds become quiet beliefs they carry for years. If you still have the chance, look them in the eyes and tell them they matter, not for what they achieve, but for who they are. And to the sons and daughters who feel like afterthoughts, don't wait for someone else to write your worth into their story. Write your own. Stand tall in your truth. Take up space. Redesign your life with the courage to remove what no longer fits. We live in a world that often celebrates noise, but sometimes strength is found in the quiet decision to stay kind, to stay steady, to keep building when no one's watching. I have learned that healing isn't loud. It doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it's the moment you walk past the house that once held your pain and feel nothing at all. Sometimes it's saying no without guilt. Sometimes it's choosing yourself and not apologizing for it. So if today you are sitting alone wondering if anyone sees, you know this. I see you. And more importantly, you can choose to see yourself. You can begin again at any age in any season. Your story is not too late. Your voice is not too soft. You are not too broken. My name is Emily Carter. I was once the forgotten daughter, the uninvited guest, the girl at the edge of every photograph. But I am no longer waiting to be included. I am building the frame. I am taking the picture, and this time I'm in the center of it. Thank you for listening, and wherever you are tonight, whether surrounded by family or alone with your thoughts, I hope you know this. You deserve a home that feels like peace. You deserve to be loved without condition. You deserve to be seen, not just on Christmas, but every single day.